I promptly replied, I'll just fucking quit. Redditors who rage quit their job share their last straw. I worked at a movie theater in my hometown all through high school. When I moved for college, I was able to transfer to a theater owned by the same company in my college town. The management at the new theater was absolutely terrible. They were demeaning to the staff, they fired people for not selling rewards cards, and they scheduled mandatory all-hands meeting with less than 1 week's notice. At one such meeting, 7 AM on a Sunday, by the way, some of my coworkers were falling asleep. To wake them up, our managers made us stand up, do 5 jumping jacks, and sit back down. They did this every time someone fell asleep during the 3-hour meeting. After around the 4th or 5th time, I decided I'd had enough and didn't stand for our punishment. My manager singled me out, asking why I refused to participate. I replied, "We are not children. Don't treat us like we are." I was 20 at the time. My manager replied by suspending me for a month, right there, in front of everyone. I promptly replied, "I'll just fucking quit," and never went back. No regrets. Working 12-hour days, for weeks on end. The day before Christmas they came in and told us that, even though the company gave everyone the day after Christmas off, my line still had to come in. I literally turned away from the meeting, grabbed my gear, and walked right out of the door. Worked at a Red Lobster for a few years in college. Didn't really have any complaints, it was what it was. Right after graduating I moved to another town, and was able to transfer to one near my new location. Worst experience of my life. Horrible management, and the location was in a relatively upscale part of town, so there were much better alternatives for seafood, so the customers were always shitty as well. We were required to be in 15 minutes prior to the start of our shift for a pre-shift meeting, and changeover and stuff. Thing is, you couldn't clock in until 5 minutes before your scheduled start time. Like every other shitty company, Darden, the owner of Red Lobster, also a very shitty company, wanted to run skeleton crews to save money, so we were always scrambling. So often I would come in, and I would already have seated tables, plural, waiting for me. The host manager's mentality was, well, they need to be here 15 minutes early anyway, so if they can seat them 15 minutes early. Nothing seemed to ever clarify why this was wrong on many levels. Well, one day I came in and already had a seated table. Went over and greeted them immediately. They were upset but understanding, and then went to the bar to ask them to make some drinks. I couldn't enter them in the system since I couldn't clock in yet. While I was waiting for the drinks I was venting to a fellow server about it and mentioned if they seat me again before I can even clock in I'm done. Well, before I could even finish the sentence they had seated me again. I told the server I was talking to it was nice to have worked with them. Made sure to let both tables know they were seated in a section that didn't even have a server yet because the company didn't want to pay for a full staff, and that they should dine at restaurants that care about them having a good experience, and walked out. No regrets, and I'll never give Darden a dime of my money ever again. I worked as one of those super annoying face-to-face fundraiser people. You know, those who will stand in your way and use every trick in the book to shame you into sending them money every month so they can continue their scam. Well, I did the one-day training, was sent out in the morning and quit after 2 hours. People hate you, for good reason, and treat you accordingly. I found out soon after how the money is really spent for the most part, and have been super against this specific type of fundraiser, especially since they ruin the face of actual fundraising. So now I just ignore them as good as possible, and warn my friends not to work for them. I worked at a small family-owned restaurant for over a year. All I did was wash dishes. The owner hated me, and always made my shift miserable, because her creepy husband loved being around me and talking to me, and she accused me of hooking up with him more than once. My last straw was her calling me a filthy whore in front of not just my coworkers, but also some customers. I was 15. So this happened 2 weeks ago. I was going out with some friends and I tore my ACL. Told my boss I couldn't come in for a while because of this. I'm a chef, so there's no way I can work with a torn ACL. However, my boss failed to understand that and said that if I didn't come in the next day I would be let go. I quit on the spot. I worked at a gas station deli and right before I went in for my shift my mom called me to tell me my sister had been rushed to the hospital and that I needed to go there to be with the family. I called my manager and they said to find someone to cover your shift. I called a few people and one person said they would come in and cover my shift. I called manager back and let them know that so and so was covering my shift and they said okay. I came in 2 days later for my next shift and the manager starts flipping out on me how they were fucked because I didn't show up for my shift. I proceeded to remind them that I had to go to the hospital for my sister and that so and so was covering my shift. She then proceeds to tell me how so and so didn't show up therefore it was my fault and that I cost them money and all this bullshit. I was like, are you fucking kidding me? I'm sorry you were too methed out to remember our call, but I had a family emergency so fuck you and fuck this place. I walked out the door and proceeded to fuck them one more time. I used to work as a lifeguard. I had injured my shoulder and was in a sling and they forced me to come into work and threatened to fire me if I didn't. I had to guard a pool being unable to swim because my arm was in a sling. Did the pettiest thing possible. Sent in my resignation late at night, the day before my morning shift. Have fun finding a replacement, assholes. There were a couple things building up to the last straw. Mainly I was the supervisor of my crew, but the boss was getting around to the paperwork that would confirm my title change and pay raise for 3 months. Also I was supposed to get full medical benefits, but the day I quit the benefits were in the mail so just wait for 7 months. The last straw was when the company had approaching deadlines and the scumbag management staff was getting desperate. They kept cutting out everyone's breaks and harassing people out of filing first aid reports. Someone on my crew was starting to get heat rash, working in summer in the middle of a heat wave, but the boss was standing in the shade glaring us down, so we wouldn't take breaks. After my coworker collapsed I stopped everything and ran to her side to help. The boss came up and said oh shit heat stroke. Take 5 minutes, get water, get back to work so I exploded and told them to go fuck themselves and they're as bad as a manager as they are a person and they can't treat people like that. I helped my coworker gather her things and I gathered mine and I drove her to the hospital and I never went back. I immediately filed a safety breach report with WorkSafe BC telling them of every safety rule they broke. And since then I heard that 2 others quit. The company is under investigation and another co-worker asked me to support him in filing a discrimination lawsuit against the company. The same shitty boss was very racist towards natives. My wife was about to give birth and I took the job as a temp thing. Was only there for 3 weeks. It just moved to the city. Worked there while I continued to look for an office job in engineering. The super I called to let know my wife was having contractions and her water broke. Told me to get to work and that the baby wouldn't be born till later anyways. I said no, I'm driving my wife to the hospital now, and he told me to get the fuck to work. I simply said I quit and hung up on him. 10 days later I found a job and have been employed here for 4 years now. I got a job relocating large fully grown trees. The shop workers were talking this company up while I was doing my orientation saying this place was a feel-good career. First week, we tore down an old house on our tree farm's land. All of the drywall, which is technically toxic because of how old it was supposed to be removed for a fee by the dump. They dug a ditch on a customer's house and buried it on their land when they weren't home. I then was asked to change crews. There were only 2, and the one I moved to had a very high turnover rate. Todd was the boss of this crew. Todd was a fucking dick. He was a 35-ish-year-old man with a 18-year-old girlfriend. He bragged about how he banged her at her family camping trip with her parents in the next tent. About how he cheated on her, etc. He also loved calling everyone names. On my first day with him, he called me a fucking loser because I had a RHCP sticker on my car. I had literally zero experience in that field, was hired as a laborer, and was made to drive an excavator. Never used one before. Got the hang of it pretty okay after a day or two. I was trying to get it in between two houses that were pretty close together, taking my time. He yelled at me to hurry your dumbass up. I got out of the excavator, threw the key in the middle of the ditch, and got in my car and left. Was working my second job as a welder, booked 2 weeks holiday, paid for a trip to Canada to see the now wife's family. The day before we are set to leave, my manager tells me he's going to have to cancel it as he's booked 3 people off on the same weeks. I explained I'd paid out thousands on a holiday. He then said I booked mine last, so I'd have to lose it. I spoke with everyone on site, yet no one else had holiday booked. I went 2 hours, and he was called in to explain. He came out with the same crap. Hours backed him up. I said okay, got up, and walked off site. 45 phone call missed by the time I'd driven home. 1 voicemail demanding I get my ass back in or I'm fired. I called the owner and explained I'd quit and my reason. Turned my phone off and went in holiday. Aftermath. I returned from the holiday to nearly 50 voicemails from manager telling me I'm in deep shitty CT and should watch my back when in public. Sent them all to a solicitor and police in case anything happened, along with sending former boss everything. He was dismissed and I was offered his job as I'd been there longer than most of the team. Didn't accept as wanted to become self-employed, and it was the push I needed. I was 18 and working at a movie theater concession stand on an extra busy day. My coworkers made themselves busy doing things that didn't need to be done, like checking toilet paper or organizing candy, instead of helping me with a line that wrapped itself around the stand. One lady got extremely nasty with me because I didn't butter the middle of her popcorn. She was literally screaming at me for it. I looked and saw one of my coworkers just watching me and laughing as they pretended to clean the ticket booth window. I logged out of the pose, walked out of the concession stand, slammed the door behind me, told the customer she was being a complete bitch and didn't need more butter, told my coworker to go F himself, and walked out. I looked and saw one of my coworkers just watching me and laughing as they pretended to clean the ticket booth window. I logged out of the pose, walked out of the concession stand, slammed the door behind me, told the customer she was being a complete bitch and didn't need more butter, told my coworker to go F himself, and walked out. Told 3 out of 4 managers, one wasn't there that day, that my grandma had died, so I wouldn't make it to work the day after tomorrow. I also left a note for the 4th manager and asked everyone to let him know. During the funeral I got a call from the 4th manager asking where I was. I called him back and explained, and he said okay. Went to work the next day and they handed me a paper saying I'd been written up for doing an improper call out. I handed the paper back and just left. I worked at an animal shelter. I loved my boss, manager, everyone that worked there were like family to me. But the board of directors kept fucking with us, cutting our budgets and hiring people without our knowledge. One day when I was off, my boss arranged a walkout to go complain to the county executive about the unfair behavior of the board and the mistreatment of our staff, including extremely racist remarks towards our manager. All of the animals were taken care of before the walkout, and they were only gone for an hour. We thought things were finally going to get better, but 10 days later the board came in and fired my boss. Most of the staff quit and walked out with him. I wish I did too. Within the next month the new management let the place go to shit. Cats not getting their medications, being given the wrong food, and a massive ringworm outbreak. They had to open a new building just for the cats that needed to be quarantined, and the remaining original staff was thrown into the mess to supervise the new buildings ourselves. It just kept getting worse, spreading around the shelter like a wildfire. New management had no idea how to handle it, and one day a couple of veterinarians came into our building and put down 3 cats. They actually had to restrain us from the room they were euthanizing in, and after that I sat in the break room and refused to work for the rest of the day, just crying with my other coworkers instead. I went home that day and never showed back up. I now volunteer with an amazing organization with my old boss and other staff members, still rescuing animals and doing all that we can. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like, comment your story down below, and subscribe.